Welcome to SABC News. You're watching The Full View. Well, it's Wednesday and we bring you our Going Green feature. And tonight we focus on water waste. Executive Director at the Institute of Natural Resources, Duncan Hay, joins us from Pietermaritzburg this evening. A very good evening to you, Duncan. Thank you very much for your time this evening. Essentially it seems that it's a continued battle on the state of our sewage systems, and South Africans seem to be complaining on the deteriorating state. As it stands, how would you describe the state of our infrastructure that our water currently has?
Good evening, Shante, and greeting to viewers. I just want to, we have a lot of comments about the state of the infrastructure and the collapse of local municipalities, and clearly there's a great role to play in municipalities in this. But I think what we're seeing to a certain extent is a gathering of almost the perfect storm. So let me take you through a couple of the issues. But first I want to say, I don't think this is just a green issue. This is an issue about people. This is an issue about humanity. So if I think about the perfect storm and I think of the various things that are happening that contribute to it, I mean, firstly, the water that we have, the water that moves our poo, that moves our sewage down the system, is in essence far too cheap. So one of the things to consider is when you flush your toilet, it costs you about 20 cents. Now, that is like 5% of the cost of a loaf of bread. So that's the first point. Really, the water, the medium that takes our waste away, is really, really very inexpensive. The second point is that we live in a society where the vast majority of society has been deprived of what we call the flush for most of their lives. People aspire to a flush toilet, so what we have is a hell of a lot more sewage than we ever had before. We also have a society, many of us, in which the garbage collection is failing. People either put their sewage, their waste down the toilet or sometimes directly into the river system. We've had 20 years of poor maintenance of our infrastructure. And the very interesting thing about sewage is a lot of it, I can see it portrayed here in front of us, but a lot of it we don't see. It happens downstream. So if our water gets switched off, we know about it. If our electricity gets switched off, we know about it. But when the sewer systems stop working, we don't necessarily, as people, know about it unless we see what you're portraying in front of us right now.
Definitely. In more urban areas, a consumer naturally might not think that sewage waste would be affecting them. But let's actually have a look at the knock-on effect on how it actually does affect them, how it affects food prices, and how you mentioned earlier at the cost of actually having to purify that water. And essentially, the consumers are the ones at the end of the day that bear that cost.
Absolutely. So if I come from Pietermaritzburg, so I can relate fairly clearly. We've all seen the issues around the Vaal Dam. We've all seen, around the Vaal River, around with Mfoleni municipality, issues around the Yukskay, issues around Hartbeespoort Dam, all focusing on water quality. I come from an area, we have the Mzanduzi River, which then flows into the Umgeni. So what do we have is a situation where at the moment, and we did a little calculation on this, it's not entirely accurate, but roughly 15 to 20,000 cubic meters of sewage from Pietermaritzburg gets straight into the Mzanduzi River and its tributaries. So that's about, it's difficult to imagine that amount, but what we're looking at is about 8 8 Olympic-sized swimming pools every single day of sewage is heading into our natural systems. Okay, so what are the costs of all that? So the first thing, we have a downstream cost to the ecology of the system, and that is a costing which is really difficult to quantify. But what it is doing is, because of the amounts, it reduces the ability of the river system to actually cope with the waste that is coming down. As we get further downstream and we get into the Umgeni River and Inanda Dam is a major water resource for Durban. Now, the cost of purifying that water back to drinking water becomes considerable. There's also a health cost borne downstream. First of all, by local people who use that river, you have a situation where there's disease, there's Escherichia coli, there are a number of pathogens which are a result of the sewer load. There's also some really unfortunate issues, like what they call cyanobacteria, which is now entered Inanda Dam because of the high levels of nitrates and phosphates, and that is a health issue to those people who are using that system. Then finally, it is the Mzanduzi and the Umgeni River are a source of recreational use, swimming, paddling, the Duzi Canoe Marathon. And there's an economic cost, because we know in the Mzanduzi Canoe Marathon that the numbers have dropped over the last few years. And one of the reasons is because of the reduced water quality.
Yeah. Let's have a look at the economic threat at large that this also poses on South Africa's economy. In terms of, the resources, the lack of investment that you had mentioned that has gone into our sewage system over the years. And now we're clearly seeing that gross neglect as it's coming to the par. Let's talk about the compounding effects that this then has on produce, on the quality of produce that South Africa exports, and possibly it being declined at borders and it not meeting standards to be exported abroad.
One of the really interesting, related to fresh produce and related to the economics and related to the failure not only of our sewer systems, but of our water quality generally, can be found really in Mpumalanga and the Limpopo provinces, where you have a situation where in what used to be called the Highveld, you have large mining operations, you have a number of municipalities. Those compound together to reduce your water quality. Downstream of that, you've got what is effectively South Africa's fruit basket, major producers, and that the water quality there that is going onto your produce is a cause for concern, and it doesn't necessarily reduce the ability to market, but it increases the cost of marketing our fresh produce.
Yeah, definitely. What essentially is this turnaround strategy of the gross neglect that we see in our sewage systems, not only for infrastructure, not only for calling on a municipal help, but as society, as South Africans?
Look, as I said at the beginning, this is the gathering storm, and there are multiple causes for the problems that we face. But if I go back to a recent quote by the columnist Ralph Mathega, he said, "I believe the biggest risk to South African democracy is the collapse of municipalities." So really, it's not about technical fixes. It's not about that. It goes beyond that. It goes about reform in our municipalities who are responsible for supplying us with clean water and for processing the water that goes through. But equally, it is a responsibility of society at large to observe and see what is going on and to report what is going on, and when necessary to toy in the streets to record our displeasure at what is going on, and then make constructive input to try and find solutions. The one thing about water, and water is the basis of our sewage, it is the integrator. We cannot deal with it on a sector basis. We have to deal with it together, as government, as the private sector, as society, as NGOs, as research institutions that I come from. We have to work on this together, and that is really the only way we're going to solve this problem.
Definitely. We thank you very much for your time this evening. That was the Executive Director at the Institute of Natural Resources, Mr. Duncan Hay, on the state of water and sewage waste and how it's been impacting society at large. We do value your comments. Have your say here at the Full View on SABC News. Hashtag Full View. You can send us your voice notes or some of your video calls on +27 if you are outside South Africa, 664798056. You can also view any of our interviews and features seen here on the Full View, sabcnews.com. You can visit our Facebook page, of course, finding us on Twitter, including that hashtag of Full View. We take a short break.